AI has a lot of uses, and we've all experimented with it. We've all started using it. But what about AI in order to win clients? Does it give us an advantage as entrepreneurs? So today we're going to discover how entrepreneurs can actually directly compete with the big companies to win clients by using AI to unlock the prospects' biases, their beliefs, and their desires. And we have an expert in this area. He wrote the book, The Persuasion Engine, and specifically how any business can use AI-powered neuromarketing to understand and win customers. And our guest today on the Wealthability Show is Roger Dooley. Roger, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show, Tom.
And if you would, I know your background, but please give our audience your background and why this topic, why you're the expert in this topic, basically.
Well, I won't go into all of my background. Started as an engineer, eventually was a corporate head of strategy, then bailed out to become an entrepreneur. And since then, I've been sort of a serial entrepreneur. In the early days of the home computer business, we had a mail order company, co-founded a business called College Confidential, which became the biggest website for college-bound students and parents. Later sold that to the Daily Mail Group. But for the last 20 years or so, I've been writing and speaking about the intersection of marketing, business, and how our brains work. I started writing about neuromarketing, which back 20 years ago was a pretty complicated, expensive thing. You hook people up to, say, an EEG machine and measure their brain waves as they were looking at an advertisement or looking at a video, print ad, and then try to determine from what you were seeing on the EEG whether it was going to be effective or not. But things have changed a lot in those 20 years. Now, many of these tools that were really only available to big companies have become very accessible even to entrepreneurial organizations and small businesses.
So let's talk about really what you're talking about. So you use the term neuromarketing. What is it?
Well, I use a pretty broad-based definition of it. In other words, what I could say is neuromarketing is any use of our understanding of how the brain works to market better. Some people are more purists. They want it to restrict it to things like actually measuring brain waves and such. But to me, if we can understand how our customer's brain works through the teachings of Robert Cialdini, who wrote the great book Influence, just celebrated its 40th anniversary a few years ago,
Wow.
or Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. These are tools that any size business can use. You don't need expensive equipment. You just need those ideas to understand those ideas. So that's my sort of broad definition of neuromarketing. And the thing that I find really exciting is that now even those ideas, which previously were sort of locked inside pretty long books that often entrepreneurs and smaller businesses don't have a time to read or aren't going to recall what they read, now are readily accessible through the wonders of artificial intelligence.
Well, and I've always found, so I remember reading Influence when it first came out. Of course, Cialdini is local to here in Arizona and was an ASU professor. And so, but what I always found difficult was the actual practical application of it, right? It's one thing to understand, for example, when he talks about, you give somebody something and that creates an expectation for something in return, right? That was one of those big concepts that came out in Influence. But actually practicing that is very different. So does AI help us with the practical application of it? In other words, do we still need to understand everything? Because that's the biggest challenge is really understanding how it works. I mean, we have, neurolinguistics processing has been around for a long time. Another word for it is hypnotism, frankly. All right. So that's all hypnotism is just advanced NLP. We've had that for years and years and years and years. Okay. I mean, it's been used on stages. It's been used all over the world, but that doesn't mean everybody can do it. So how do you think actually AI helps us use that?
Well, yeah, Tom, I think that many of Cialdini's ideas are actually quite accessible and constantly used in business. If you visit any travel website, for example, you're going to see things like only 2 hotel rooms left at this price.
Right.
That's scarcity.
Right.
25 people booked this hotel today. That's social proof. Or maybe a review from Condé Nast Traveler magazine. That's authority. So it's very common. I think you mentioned his idea of reciprocation or reciprocity. When you say, okay, hey, download my free guide to tax advantage investments, then that person is likely to sign up for your mailing list to get that. And not only that, you'll have given them something, and then maybe you'll have a chance to sell them some services later. So these principles are used constantly by businesses. Sometimes they know they're doing it, other times they just think it's good business practice. But where AI can help is choosing which principles might work best in a particular situation, and then also coming up with ideas, different ways to use a particular principle. What different kinds of social proof could we use here, for example? And the good thing about AI is that it understands these principles, it understands human behavior fairly well, and so it can come up with good ideas. It is not perfect. You still have to be the human in the loop that's judging, okay, this is a good idea, or I know my customers, I don't think this is going to work. And of course, pushing back when necessary. But AI can be a very powerful tool. I go into a lot of that in this second major part of the book, where I have a whole lot of specific prompts and ways that you can use
See,
AI to employ these principles.
and that's what I like about this book, because I like the idea that, okay, here's the prompts to use, because I think a lot of it is we know those principles. Like I get all those principles, right? But then how do I get AI to help me understand how to use them, right? How do I ask the right question? Because I find with AI, and I always remind people that the A in AI stands for artificial, which is another word for that is fake. Okay. So it's not real intelligence. It's really just an accumulation of human intelligence. That's really all it is. But the nice thing is that it's read all these books. It's digested all these books. It didn't have any problem with digesting all these books. And so if we have the right questions, we can get the answers we want. The challenge, I think, with AI generally is most people don't have the right questions. They don't have the knowledge to ask the right questions, so they can't possibly get the right answer. And to go to that point, you talk about empathy target as something that AI can help you do. Can you describe what you mean by empathy target, and then why do we miss that? And how does AI solve that? Or how could it?
Right. Well, I suggest using an empathy audit on any important communication, whether it is a policy change, a price announcement, some corporate direction change, or even a routine customer letter. Your shipment has been delayed, because actually humans are not that great at emotional intelligence and empathy. Surprisingly enough, you would think that, okay, we're humans,
We are
we all
not.
have that, right? But they aren't. In fact, last year, some scientists in Switzerland ran an experiment where they gave the major AI models of the time an emotional intelligence test, the same tests that can be administered to humans. And AI scored in the 80s compared to about 60% for the average human. The best AI scored 89%, and that might be higher than the most emotionally intelligent person on your team. So that's pretty, and those were last year's models. Today's models are even better and more powerful. So AI gets emotion and empathy. So when you ask it to evaluate your policy change, and if you describe your customers, and I think one thing that goes beyond prompting too, I should throw this in right now, Tom. Prompting is important. I've got lots of prompts in the book, but it's also important to provide your own context. That is, the better your answers will be much better when you can explain what your customers are like, what you've tried that worked, what you tried that didn't work, if you're in a particular geographic area, what that is, what it's like. The more context you can provide, the better, more detailed answers you're going to get, the more effective the advice is going to be. So you've got to provide that context. But given that, it can predict how your customers or how your employees will react to an announcement. And in the book, I've got a few kind of business horror stories of companies that made an announcement or sent a customer communication out that went really horribly awry. It went viral, but for the bad reasons, not good reasons. And when you look at that, you wonder, even as just a sort of a general business person, you look at, well, what were they thinking when they sent that out? Did they not think people were going to react that way? But I think that we all have these blind spots when it comes to our customers or our employees. We think we know how they're going to react, and we don't necessarily solicit a whole bunch of other opinions. Instead, we say, okay, yeah, this is going to work, and then it doesn't. Where AI can provide unbiased feedback on how people are likely to react. And in my experience, that advice is usually pretty good. And when I've run some of these negative examples through, and it correctly predicted the negative reactions of the customers. And also, it provided a way that, okay, if you have to communicate this, in one case, it's in relation to a cruise ship announcement that diverted a luxury ship for a corporate photo shoot and caused travel delays for their customers. It started off by saying, don't do this, in capital letters. I was using Claude on that one. Claude rarely says anything in capitals, but it said, don't do this. This is really going to aggravate your customers who expect a seamless experience. But it also crafted a far better communication. The original corporate communication was, I looked at it and said, okay, this is kind of tone deaf. It was all corporate speak, euphemisms for the delay. There was no apology, no acknowledgement that the people who were expecting this luxurious experience on this 6-star cruise ship with a butler for every stateroom and just everything perfect were suddenly going to have to be scrambling to get their airplane reservations changed in the middle of Florida spring break. I mean, this is really, you can't make this stuff up. But Claude did point out that it was tone deaf, but it said, okay, if you've got to do this, here's how you communicate it. And it did it in a much more empathetic way. It crafted a letter that recognized that this was going to be a huge inconvenience, that it wasn't what they recognized that the customers were not expecting this. They were expecting this seamless experience. It offered assistance in rebooking, which the original one did not do. Instead of just saying, if you incur any additional airline expense, send us a receipt and we'll reimburse it if it's reasonable. It made it a much more positive statement about additional costs incurred, because some people might have to stay overnight in a hotel, who knows what. It even offered a future cruise credit, a modest future cruise credit. Now, of course, this is AI creating this. A real human executive would have to look at this and say, okay, this we can do, this we can't do. We don't have the resources to do that, or this would be too expensive. Ideally, they would have done this before the whole thing and avoided the mess. But to me, the letter that Claude created was just pitch perfect. It didn't recommend celebrating on the pool deck, which is what the original letter did. Well, these people who are inconvenienced are going to be up there celebrating with champagne while helicopters flying around. It's crazy. Instead, it really hit every note perfectly. And to me, that's the benefit that AI can provide. Now, of course,
so it sounds to me like this is something we shouldn't just be using with customers, but this is also something we should be using with employees. This might be something we use with vendors. This is a tool because this is the challenge I find with email correspondence in particular. People who are the nicest people in the world in a phone conversation, video conversation, an actual human interaction just come off horrible in email, and they're nasty, and they're, and I love that you emphasize the word empathy. How's the other person going to feel about this? And that because of everything that AI has access to on the internet, it can look at, hey, how have people reacted to things? And okay, they reacted this way, maybe they'll react this way, and maybe this is a better way. Now, like you said, I think it does take the human, because you have to decide, A, are we going to spend all that money in the cruise case? Or B, is that really what I want to say? Right? So I don't think we can just say, well, because it's pretty obvious also that something's just purely AI, which, I mean, that gets to be really obvious, and people hate that. And I actually want to ask you that question. Why is that? Why do people hate it when it's obviously AI? as opposed to obviously human.
Right. Well, there's some interesting data on that. In another experiment, scientists showed people responses to a customer problem that were supposed to be empathetic, and there were two versions, one written by AI and another by humans. The customers, in this case, or the subjects, preferred the AI response. They found it to be more empathetic. But when they were labeled human and AI, the customers preferred the human response, even though that had, the other subjects had judged it to be inferior to the other one. So people still don't think that AI can be empathetic, and there's some validity in that.
It seems to me, it seems to me like it's more than that, Roger, because, for example, I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and I was talking about, well, let's say that you called up a business and you were looking to buy something. You wanted to inquire about their services or their products, et cetera. They were adamant that if they'd found out that it was an AI bot that was talking to them, even if it wasn't, they could obviously tell it was an AI bot, but it was an AI bot that was talking to them versus a human. They were upset. Why didn't you tell me this was an AI bot? Why is that? Because I'm thinking, personally, on the entrepreneur side, on the business owner side, the advantage of the AI bot is they're going to do the same thing every time, right? They're not going to change based on what they think, like a human salesperson would do, right? They're not going to hard sell. If you tell the bot don't hard sell, the bot won't hard sell. But a human, their natural tendency is, well, you haven't bought, now I want this commission, so therefore I'm going to sell harder, right? And so you get that emotion from the human that you wouldn't get from the bot. So as a buyer, I look at it, I'm going, I would much rather talk to a bot than a human when it comes to in a sales situation, because I don't want the hard sell. I just want that interaction, right? I don't go to a salesperson to get my human interaction. I mean, that's that's why you have family. That's why that's why you go to a restaurant. I mean, whatever you go to, those are social things. I don't consider a sale needing to be a social thing. Why is it though that there's a good portion of the population that if you're not clear that, hey, you're talking to a bot, they're upset, and they're really upset.
Well, I think you've hit on a bunch of important points there, Tom. First of all, I do think that transparency is important. If you're using a bot, if you're talking to a bot, the customer or whoever should know that it's a bot. I think that people have hated chatbots for a long time because they've been so horrible. You get they're like the first line of defense to prevent you from talking to a human. So they're asking you all these stupid questions, giving you answers that don't make sense, or just say, I don't understand that, and I can't help you with that. And people get so frustrated that kids start screaming "human, human" in their phone or typing it into their chat box. But I think that chatbots are getting better and better. They can actually solve your problem in many cases now. But I think that transparency is still important. Part of it is understanding of empathy, because if I'm talking to a human airline representative and I just missed my flight and it's the last flight of the day and I'm very inconvenienced, and that rep says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I understand how you must feel. Here's how we can help solve your problem." I believe that person can understand how I feel. But if it's a chatbot and it says, "I know how you must feel," I say, "Well, no, you don't. You're a machine." So that empathy rings a little hollow. But when the empathy is coming from a human, even if AI wrote that message, then I think it all comes together, because the human can legitimately deliver that. The AI is actually helping humans express their empathy, and humans can really be lacking in empathy. One example that just popped in my mind when I was thinking, we had a dog for 14 years, lovable guy. He finally died, unfortunately, and took him to the vet, and they had him cremated, brought back the ashes, and as the receptionist hands me back my dog's ashes as I'm going out the door, she says, "Have a great weekend." I mean, that was I think that any AI would have said, okay, that is not how you want to be saying things to your customers in that particular moment. But
So do you
that, I'm
think?
sure that if she had thought about that, would not have said that. She said, oh yeah, that was just, it sort of popped out of my mouth. I didn't really mean to say that. But what AI can do is help bring out the real empathy that humans have.
Okay, so I've thought for a long time that AI could get to the point fairly quickly now where sales calls could be handled by AI as opposed to be handled by humans. The challenge with humans handling them is that it's different every time. And so they won't follow the program. If I could get a human to be as consistent as an AI bot, I would use humans all day long, but I can't. It's just not possible. I've been telling, for example, I've been telling my salespeople to do things a certain way for 10 years, and I cannot get them to do it. Okay. So whereas an AI bot, I would tell it to do it and he would do it. So, but you're suggesting, what I'm hearing you say is you don't think that salespeople should ever be AI bots, that they should always be humans, even though there's the human weaknesses that come with having humans do that because they're never going to be consistent. It's not the
Well,
nature of a
I guess,
human.
yeah, that is exactly what I was implying, Tim. I think that many interaction situations, like customer interactions, whether it's customer support, a tech support, or even a sales situation, could be handled by AI. I think it needs to be transparent. Just somebody has to know they're talking to about, because as you point out, if they find out later they thought they were dealing with a human and, oh, hey, that wasn't a human, they're going to be angry. And it's just, they feel tricked, they feel deceived. So that's human nature. But there are many situations where if it's a very simple transaction, I'd be perfectly fine dealing with a bot. One thing that we've seen in grocery stores for a decade now are these self-checkout lines. And most stores have them, most larger supermarkets and whatnot have them. Some places have tried to push people into them, and that's very annoying to customers. If there was one human cashier and you've got a bunch of stuff and you're going to be stuck trying to scan these things and you run out of bags, and it's really annoying. People don't like that. On the other hand, I know that if I've got 5 items, I know they have barcodes, I don't have to weigh them or figure out what their product code is or some other darn thing. And I'm going to make a beeline for the self-checkout because I know I can get through it quickly. I don't need to interact with anybody. And so I think that the same is true in any kind of, say, phone or online sales situation. If it's a transaction that can be handled effectively by a bot of some kind, then I think people will be fine with that. I mean, there'll always be a few. I mean, there's some people who always go for the human cashier, even if they have one item, just
Right.
because for some reason they want that human interaction. But they're the exception. I think most people are probably a
So,
lot like me.
so
They,
are
they
you
judge which is
suggest,
going to be better.
so are you suggesting, Roger, that you ought to give them a choice? Because that's what I hear you saying in the checkout line. People ought to have a choice. So are you suggesting that even if you did go lean heavily on the AI bot, that you might say for human, press, you know, press here, press one for human, for a human. Would you go that far? Would you actually give them that choice?
I would, at least at the current state of technology. I mean, maybe we'll reach a point where everybody is so accepting of AI and it's
Got
so
it.
effective that
But we're
people
still in
aren't even going
transition.
to, yeah, think about that. But I think that for the moment, yes, you should make it, the AI should not be a barrier to reaching a human if somebody really wants to. I know, and some companies capitalize on that. We've got a bank here in Texas, a Frost Bank, and one of
Mhm.
their mottos has been, if you've probably dealt with some of the voice
Oh
menus
yeah.
at big banks where you're trying to call your local branch to see if somebody's there, and you get these voice menus and none of the choices are giving you what you want. You end up in a call center and who knows where. And all you want to do is find out if the person you need is at the branch. And you can't do it, or you have to fight your way through 10 minutes of menus to get there. Where this particular bank promises 2 rings and a human. They recognized this failing in their bigger competitors, and they say that within 2 rings, you're going to call them up and you're going to get a human. Now, that probably costs them a little bit more than having some kind of a chatbot or a voice menu system, screen calls and annoy people for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. But I think it's a promise they've made, and I think that their customers appreciate it.
So let's get back to neuromarketing. I went off on a little tangent there. Thank you for letting me go down that rabbit hole. Let's get back to your neuromarketing. Okay, so it's not just empathy, clearly. What is how do you use AI to understand your customers better so that you can, frankly, get them what they want? Because that's the ultimate goal of marketing, is to get the right customers what they want. It's not to try to manipulate somebody into buying something they don't want. Hopefully, it's really to get the right customers to actually get what they want and what they need. And the challenge of the salesperson is the prospect may not know that they need it, and it's the salesperson's job to help them understand what they need. That's the marketing person's job, is to help people understand, okay, this is where, if you have this particular problem, you could find the answer, and it's going to be the type of answer that you want. Okay. So that's the whole exchange, right? Between marketing people and prospects. So how do you use AI, and not just how do you use AI, but what is it that you're trying to do that AI could help you with in order to influence? Really, it's influence those people to make decisions that ultimately they would probably want to make if they understood everything, but they don't understand everything.
Right. Well, I think there's a couple of sort of broad categories of ways. One I'll touch on briefly is AI is sort of a replacement for some traditional neuromarketing tools for studying customer reactions. And maybe the best example is eye tracking, where for decades, advertisers have used eye tracking systems to judge where people are looking when they're looking at an advertisement, say a commercial or a print ad or a website. You want to know what people are looking at, and often eye tracking data can show, hey, we expect people to be looking at the product or our headline. Instead, they're looking at this other thing that isn't really important. It's in the background, and that's valuable data. But it was very expensive to do that, because you'd have to recruit people, bring them into a laboratory, either use expensive glasses or expensive sensors, show them what you're evaluating, collect the data, and so on. Where now you can do that kind of work using an AI simulation with a high degree of accuracy in just seconds for the price of a cup of coffee. Excuse me. And it's so fast, so simple, and it is the suppliers of this typically say 90 and even 95% accurate, and it's so this can give you insights that you couldn't normally afford. Like if you're looking at a small business webpage, you can never afford an expensive eye tracking study, but you could do an AI simulation of the eye tracking and see what people are looking at. So that's one. The second category of space, sorry. The second category is the using AI to characterize your customers. You can even do customer profiles using AI. You can develop your ideal customer profiles or customer personas. Now, again, you have to take this with a grain of salt. The more, if you just tell it, hey, I sell widgets, come up with my ideal customer persona, you're not going to get a very good response probably. It's going to be very generic and not too useful. But to the extent that you can describe what it is that you're selling, who you've been successful with, what your current customers look like, then AI can do extensive research and develop customer personas that you can then market to as individual types. It can develop your ideal customer profile. It can look at what your competitors are doing. How are your competitors marketing to these people? What sorts of behavioral interventions are they using? And one fun example I have in the book, I was visualizing like what kind of local businesses could never afford to do expensive marketing studies. I said, okay, how about a pool service business? I'm in Austin, you're in Arizona. We all have a lot of pools, and they all require service. And many people use an outside company to do that. And there's a lot of competition, a lot of fly-by-nights and others. But in any case, I said, okay, I want to start this business. I gave it my particular city area and said, okay, help me develop a marketing plan, analyze the competition and what what behavioral science interventions they're using on their website. And it did that. It talked about, first of all, went out and figured out who the competitors were and did a variety of sort of deep research on that. Okay, these are the competitors. This is what the customer base is like. It correctly identified the demographics for the customers in our particular sort of suburban area that would be distinct from other areas of the city. And it went out and looked at their websites and even found some surprising things. In one case, a competitor, potential competitor of my hypothetical pool service business, had a page comparing their business to the competition. And there were sort of two columns, like this is what we do and this is what the competitors do. And for the competitors, it had listed stuff like peeking in your windows, peeing in your pool. And it's like, do pool people really look in windows and pee in pools? I would guess not very often. And this told me a few things. First of all, this particular competitor probably missed the boat because a normal customer who sees that is going to find that so weird that they're going to probably move on to the next company. But the mere fact that it identified this particular flaw that was like some levels down in their website, it wasn't on the home page. This was pretty far down. It shows the kind of research that AI can help you with. And to me, that's the power of AI, where it can do a lot of this research work for you. Again, you are the business person. You still have to exercise judgment. And you can even, of course, have another model check results if it's something really important, which I always do. If I'm working on something important, I may use Claude as my primary tool, but I may have Gemini or ChatGPT run a similar study or take a look at my analysis, my first analysis, and see what they think and so on. This is all, you're leveraging the power of AI and you're minimizing the chance of hallucinations or dumb errors too.
Well, and there's also other people looking at it, right? So, I mean, I always think it's a good idea to have somebody else look at it, not just AI look at it.
Oh, yeah.
But let me ask you a question. So, as we start to wrap up here, so going back to my original point that you ask a stupid question, you get a stupid answer, and that is generally true of any kind of question you ask to anybody you ask it to. I think it's actually on steroids when it's AI. You ask a dumb question to AI or you ask the wrong question to AI, you will get really bad answers. But then you're trusting them. But it's not AI that's the problem. It's your question that's the problem. So it goes back to you talking about the prompts and asking the right questions. How do you, when you're building this persona, because I think that persona and then identifying that and where are they and all that kind of stuff, I think that's a beautiful use of AI. How do you make sure that you're actually doing this in a way that you're not going to get the, pee in the pool answer?
Right. Well, I think there's two things that I can suggest that will greatly improve your prompting. First of all, you're absolutely correct. If you ask a dumb question or a very simple question, you'll get a bad answer, but it will have a high degree of confidence from the AI. It'll come across as, this is what you should do. Or
Yep.
So here's a couple of quick hacks. I do have, of course, a lot of prompts in the book. And one thing I did, this is kind of an experiment on my part. I don't know what you think of it, Tom, but I was really concerned that two things. First of all, I was visualizing people trying to type in long prompts from the text in the book, and that seemed like really tedious, or them trying to scan it and scan pages and stuff, and that seemed tedious. So what I did was I create a little website that I link to at the end of each chapter where you've got copy and paste prompts, so they can just go there and copy the prompt out, but also where I have improved prompts. And so that's one way that I tried to make the prompting process easier and not limit myself to like 5-word prompts that would be easy to type
I like
in.
that.
But I've got two hacks for you that I think anybody can apply, even if they don't have the book, certainly. One is when you're asking for advice on a marketing question or any advice, always finish your prompt with, ask any questions that will help you answer or will help you respond. That will almost always generate several additional questions that will refine exactly what you're looking for. So even if you phrased it poorly, the AI is probably going to sense that and ask you to clarify it in some ways. If you haven't said what kind of customer you're dealing with, it may ask you about your customers. or your product or something. So that's one thing. Just append that to every prompt, and you're going to get better results every single time. And the second hack is to give it your prompt and then ask your AI, whether it's Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, to write a better prompt. I've got one example of that in the book where I started off with a pretty detailed prompt. It was a 100-word prompt about, which is on the longer side for a human-entered prompt, but it came back with a 400-word prompt that really fleshed out the details were missing in the first one and added in a couple of thoughts that I didn't. For instance, I was asking for a marketing plan of some kind, and it said, okay, create an implementation schedule, or identify quick wins and this sort of thing, which I didn't think of asking it to identify quick wins versus longer term things, but in this lengthy prompt, it did. So to me, those two things.
So basically ask AI to help you ask a better question.
Right, exactly. And it will.
I like it.
The prompt that it creates will be more detailed. And of course, you can review it. If it adds something there that you say, well, I don't really need this, or this isn't right, you can delete that. But I can guarantee you that in 9 times out of 10, the prompt that it writes is going to be more detailed and more effective than the one you wrote.
I love it. So we're all, as entrepreneurs, investors, we're all always trying to find the right customer and help them understand why they should buy our services. That's what we do. That's the whole goal of being in business. And now we've got a tool, the Persuasion Engine by Roger Dooley, to actually do that, to actually help us with that, using AI to do it so that we don't have to figure out, okay, how do I write this? We don't have to be great writers. We can actually help get AI to help us with, and even AI can help us with the prompts. I think that is a brilliant recommendation. I think also help us write the better email, help us write the better, even the better PR response. Right? How do I get this information out to the market? Let's use AI not as a replacement for us, because we are ultimately the authority in our business, but rather as a tool to help us be better, more empathetic, and be able to persuade us. Roger, where would people go besides buying the Persuasion Engine? Where would they go to get more information about what you do?
Well, I'll mention that in a minute, but I should append one little thing here, Tom. You're in Arizona, home of Bob Cialdini, who invented the science of influence 40 plus years ago. And one thing that he always emphasizes is to use these tools ethically, use them to get people to a better place, not to manipulate them.
Right.
And so I should include that comment there. But the best place to find out about all my stuff is rogerdooley.com. There I've got links to my Forbes content, my podcast, my neuromarketing blog, and my socials and such. I am most active on LinkedIn. If people want to connect, that's where I spend most of my social media time.
Great. Thank you, Roger. And thanks everybody for watching and listening to this episode of the Wealthability Show. Just remember, when we actually understand our customers, we actually are empathetic with our customers, we understand how neuromarketing actually works, we use it ethically, we're going to end up with not just more customers, but better customers. And of course, we'll end up with way more money and paying way less tax. We'll see you next time on The Wealthability Show. Thanks for listening to The Wealthability Show. If today's episode gave you a new perspective, remember this: the tax law is not your enemy. It's a roadmap. And when you know how to follow it, you can build real, lasting wealth. If you're a business owner or investor who's tired of overpaying taxes, the Wealthability Accelerator is your next step. You'll have the opportunity to work directly with me for 80% less than my standard rate. And I'll personally guide you through how to change your facts so that you can change your tax. Go to wealthability.com/bonus and apply today. Remember, it's not just what you make, it's what you keep.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.